Good morning, and welcome to the Wisconsin Coalition of Annuitants virtual conference. I am Diane Wilsinski, current chair of the WICOA board. Every year we hold our conference to bring you up-to-date information on the Wisconsin retirement system and issues that affect our members. I hope that you will find the sessions today and tomorrow beneficial and share the information with those in your organizations. The Wisconsin Coalition of Annuitants consists of statewide and regional organizations representing retirees in the Wisconsin retirement system and may include active as well as retired participants in the system. The coalition exists to represent all of the approximate 238,000 Wisconsin retirement system retirees of the more than 663,000 system participants. Each member organization designates representatives to attend monthly meetings of the coalition, where guests from the State Investment Board, employee trust funds, legislative leaders, and members of boards and commissions provide input to active discussions on retirement issues. I would like to thank the guest speakers in advance for participating in this event. I would also like to thank our annual meeting committee members, Bob Schaefer, Sandy Drew, Roger Springman, Jeannie Stengel, and especially our webmaster, Rick Wojak, for their exceptional efforts in making this happen. I also would like to thank the panelists that are with us today. As part of this virtual meeting, you will be able to ask questions by pressing the Q&A button that can be found on your screen. Just click on the symbol and type in your question. Roger Springman will be the moderator and will collect the questions and present them to the speakers on your behalf. Speakers will respond to the questions at the end of their presentation. Please do not use the Q&A button, or the chat button, excuse me. Do not use the chat button. So our first speaker is Mr. John Volker. Mr. Volker is the current secretary of the Department of Employee Trust Funds. He served as the deputy secretary since 2014. He has been in the WRS for more than 33 years and appreciates the importance of a sustainable benefit program for members, communities, and employers. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Diane, and thanks everybody for inviting us to participate. It's good to be here. Hopefully everybody dodged the rough weather last night and your homes and your yards are in fine enough shape today. It's probably a fitting start. I'm in the Hill Farm State Office building. The south or the north part of the building, which I am, has power. The north side of the building does not have power. So I'm happy that we're able to get together today and dodge the impact of the weather last night. I'm also happy to be here today because actually it's 1 year, just a couple of days ago is my 1 year anniversary from when I had a heart attack. So I'm feeling great. It's 1 year, everything looks great. And it probably fits with our theme today, because we are going to talk about resilience. That is going to be the word of the day. If there's anything that you take off from today, it's going to be resilience. Now, hopefully I can get this up. There we go. Resilience, and specifically the resilience of the WRS. So I talk about resilience because I think it's the one specific characteristic of the WRS that makes us different than so many other pension systems across the country. And it happens to be that I got invited to a conference out at Stanford earlier this year, hosted by the Hoover Institution. And they really were looking at the past, the present, and the future of public pension systems. Now, I think a lot of the presenters there had some doubts that public pension systems, defined benefit systems anyhow, can be sustainable in the long term. And I was able to provide a presentation, which I've taken some slides from that presentation and included in our time together today, to talk about how Wisconsin's different, because I think as opposed to other pension systems, we have things built into it that makes us more resilient to changing circumstances than other pension systems. So what I want to do today is really go over some of those characteristics and what it means to the WRS. So let's be on the same page about what I'm talking about when I'm talking about resilience. So I use this definition because I like it by Andrew Zolli. He wrote a book on resilience. I think it's called Resilience, How Things Bounce Back. But his definition, I think, is pretty good. Resilience is the capacity of a system, enterprise, or person to maintain its core purpose and integrity in the face of dramatically changed circumstances. And for the WRS, that means as a system, we're able to continue to be there for our members and be fully funded, be able to pay our bills, so to speak, even when things change unexpectedly. And when we have resilience in a public pension system, you have sustainability. And like I said, the conference I went to was really questioning, can a public pension system be sustainable? And that, again, let's look at a definition so we're all on the same page of what we mean when we talk about sustainability. There's a variety of definitions out there as they relate to pension systems. The actuaries have one, which really say you should pre-fund it over the course of someone's career, so it's sustainable. The Pew Foundation has done a lot of work in public pensions over the years. They came up with a definition that talks about being long-term sustainability. Really means you have to match revenues and expenditures without having a lot of debt. And then finally, the International Monetary Fund, they have their own definition of a public pension sustainability, which really comes down to however you design the system, you do not run into prolonged or permanent financing constraints over a suitably long horizon. So how do we do this? How do we get resilience and sustainability into a pension system? It's not that hard. It's not a secret. This formula has been around for a long time, and this is the pension pre-funding formula. If your system can accomplish this, which really is balancing your benefits and expenses, which is your liabilities, with the revenue side of the equation, which is contributions and investment earnings. Now, this looks pretty simple, doesn't it? I mean, all you have to do is make sure your benefits and expenses are equal to your contributions and investment returns. And then you will find yourself in a position like the WRS in which you are largely fully funded. So if it's so easy, and this is not a secret on how you do it, why do we find the public pension industry in this situation? And this is the situation that kind of contributes to the conferences I went to talking about what is sustainability? How can public pensions stay sustainable? How can they be resilient when the market is so volatile? Well, you can see why people question that. If you look at this graph, it shows you the aggregate public pension funding from 2001 to 2022. If you look at 2001, everything was roses, right? You look all across the public pension industry, we find that the funding level is over 100%. But then we have the dot-com bust in early 2000s with a lot of market losses. And then you find public pension systems on the whole across the country decrease from 100 to 84%. Now, I talked about resilience. Clearly, the dot-com bubble burst was a drastically changed circumstance. So how did public pension systems stay resilient? Well, largely they didn't. We went from 100% to 84%. And then, of course, we get to 2008. We have the great financial crisis that happens. And again, we see funding levels of public pension systems across the country go from the mid-80s to the low 70s. Again, drastically changed circumstances. The design of the other systems were not in a position to position themselves to withstand that change. They weren't very resilient. And what's happened is really over the last 10 plus years, you can see that public pension systems across the country have hovered around that 70 to 75, 76%, which is not where we would like to be when you're running a pension system. So that's why there's so much discussion about sustainability. And that's why I think when we talk about the WRS, what makes us so unique is that we're resilient to those type of changes. We had 2001, we had 2008, and yet you see the WRS is largely fully funded. So what I want to do today is really break down that formula I talked about with the contributions and investment earnings needing to equal benefits and expenses, and talk about what's included within each of those components as it relates to the WRS that makes us resilient. So we'll start with the contributions. So what are the characteristics of resilience within contributions that the WRS might do that these other systems that dropped in their funding levels when things changed do not do? And it's not that hard. None of this is rocket science. Execution may be harder than for a lot of people, but the actual theory and concept is not. So when it comes to the contributions, maybe it sounds too simplistic, is you need to pay the bills, right? You have to pay what your experts, in our case, the actuaries, tell you you're going to need to put into the system to keep it funded. So every year we ask our actuaries to do a valuation of our system. Look at our liabilities, our long-term liabilities, short-term liabilities, what other income is coming into the system. And based on that, we want to figure out what the contribution level should be. And what we call that is the actuarial determined contribution. They have determined what the contribution should be. When they do that, they look at salary growth because we need to figure out what level of benefits we're going to be paying. Clearly, mortality rate, we're providing you a lifetime benefit. So we have to have a good idea of generally how long people are going to live. So we get enough money into the system to pay that. Disability rate, retirement patterns, how late are people retiring, how early are they retiring? And then the big one, another big one, and we'll talk about it more in a minute, is how much money are we getting out of our assets that we've invested through SWIP? So our actuaries look at that and they determine what our actuarially determined contribution is. Why are we unique in that regard is some systems do not do this on an annual basis. They keep contribution levels maybe level for a period of time and then review it. I don't think you can be very resilient if you're not looking at this on an annual basis. And what you find when you look across the pension system industry, public pension system industry, this is what happened to contributions during that same time period as before. If you look at the red line, which is the weighted average, and this analysis is done by the National Association of State Retirement Administrators, who do a lot of good research in this area, you'll see at the same time that investments were going down in 2001, because we had the dot-com bubble burst, they stopped providing 100% of what the actuaries were telling them to put into the system. It dropped all the way down to under 84%, you can see in 2006. It should be a time where you're putting more money into the system, because if you're looking at that equation, if one part of your revenue is going down, you're going to have to increase the other part of the revenue to stay balanced. And you can see how that happens. The other plans just did not do a very good job of putting in the amount of contributions that their actuaries told them they needed. Now, there's a lot of reasons that happens across the public pension industry. Our board gets to decide what contributions levels are. In other systems, it's the legislature, or the contribution level is set in statute. So you need to go to the legislature and say, you need to change the contribution rate from X to Y. And you know how long a legislative bill might take to get passed. By then, it might be too late to actually put the money in when you need it. So you can see that if you're not putting the money in, you're bound to have problems on the funding level. Again, when you look at the WRS, how are we resilient? You look at, we have never been under 100%. In fact, when things got really tough in 2007, 8, 9, in the fiscal crisis era, we had more than 100% being contributed. As a result, we were resilient to those changed circumstances. If you look across the board over those 20 years at the different states, don't expect to be able to see all the states identified on the bottom. You can see the WRS over that 20-year period, their median contribution paid was over the 100%, just slightly over. So we're exactly doing what you should do. The actuaries tell you how much you need. You turn around and get that much money into the system. Unfortunately, when you look at this graph, you'll see it's about 23 states that have 100% or more contributed over that time frame. That means the rest of the states are quite a bit lower. So you can imagine over a 20-year period, if your median contribution paid into the system is far under the 100% needed, you're bound to have trouble with your funding level. And unfortunately, there's some states way on the left-hand side there, New Jersey and North Dakota, that are well under 80% putting money in. What happens in a situation like that, in case of North Dakota over the last year, people question the sustainability of the system because of its funding level. And there was some interest groups that pushed a defined contribution plan through the legislature. So now they're closing their defined benefit program and moving to a defined contribution program, 401k type of system, because people were questioning the long-term sustainability of the system. So you might say, okay, if we're keeping up and putting in what the actuaries put in, our contributions rate quite a bit higher than other places because maybe they've kept them artificially low because they didn't want to pay that much into the system. This graph shows you the answer is no to that. In fact, if you're an employer in the WRS, you're thrilled about the way that we've done this because if you look across the various systems across the country, that blue line shows you what the contribution rate is for employers. And you can see that the median contribution rate for Social Security eligible workers is just over 15%. If you're in the WRS in fiscal year 22, it was 6.5%. The red line on the bottom shows what it is for employees. They're at 6.3, and the WRS is slightly above that at 6.5. But we know that money is what needed to put into the system. So when you look at the contribution part of the equation, it's pretty simple. You have your experts do the analysis, you find out what they tell you should put into the system, and you turn around and do it. Sounds easy, but it is somewhat the exception when you look across the industry. All right, so then we move on to investment income. So that's the other part of the equation on the revenue side. So what do we do on this side of the equation that actually contributes to resilience? Well, let's talk about a couple of things related to investment returns. The first is when our actuaries actually do that annual evaluation, they have to figure out how much are you expecting from investment performance. And we call that the assumed rate of return. So they are assuming that we're going to get 6.8% return on our money. And this has been an issue across the country over the years when it comes to public pensions. There's a lot of people that think that is overly optimistic, or pension plans have had overly optimistic assumed rates of return. And when you do that, you assume you're going to get a certain amount of money and you consistently don't get it. You're bound to have funding issues in the future. The good thing about the WRS, we've always been fairly conservative in setting what we assume we're going to get from investment returns. Our current assumed rate is at 6.8%. And we've always been a little bit ahead of the curve when it comes to lowering investment assumed rate of return when we get data that tells us we're not going to get the assumed rate of return that we currently have set. So we feel pretty good about 6.8 at the moment. And then every 3 years, our board looks at that assumed rate of return with the help of our actuaries and information from SWIB to say, is that still reasonable? Because we're required to have a reasonable assumed rate of return. So if our actuaries tell us it's too high, we should lower it. Now, other systems haven't necessarily done that. They've had overly optimistic assumed rates of return, and as a result, have not gotten money into the system they were expecting. We also have a higher amount of our investment income goes into the system, and I'll get into that in a minute, than other public pension systems. So we make the best use of the investment income that we have. And when it comes to making the best use of it, when we're fully funded, we can put all the investment earnings into the system and not have to pay off debt. So if you think about systems that are not fully funded, not only do they have to put money in that funds the expected benefits, they should be putting extra money in to make up for the difference that they have shortchanged the system over the years. So they don't get the full extent of the investment earnings into the actual system. We have the benefit of doing that, which also contributes to resilience. I talked about assumed rate of returns. It's been a trend over the last number of years because of criticism and where the market's been, that public pension systems have had too high of expectations on how much money they can get from their investments. And you can see from this graph, again, done by the National Association of State Retirement Administrators, that we used to expect about 8%, including the WRS back in the early 2000s. And that has dropped considerably over the years because people have reduced what they think they can get out of investment returns, and some political pressure to say you were too optimistic to begin with. The blue line shows you what the WRS has done. We've always been a little bit ahead of the curve. As I said before, we dropped from 8 to 7.8 and then dropped all the way to 7.2 in 2011, way before the rest of the system started taking this type of action. And then you can see we're pretty close to the national average at the moment at 6.8 for us and 6.9 across the industry, which is pretty standard. Pretty right around 7 is where everybody is at the moment, and it's holding pretty steady. You've seen this graph go down a lot over the last number of years. Seems like everybody's holding pretty steady at the moment. So how well has SWIB done then? So we have this assumed rate. Have they met that? Have we gotten money into the system that we've assumed that they're going to put into the system? Again, we're going to find for the WRS that we've done quite well. So investments are volatile, so you're likely not to get the assumed rate of return every year. But if you look at this, this is 15 years of data, and the blue line shows you what our assumed rate is in any given year. And then the yellow line, or the yellow bar graph, shows you what SWIB's return was. So out of the 15 years, 10 of the 15, SWIB exceeded the assumed rate of return. And not only did they exceed it 10 out of the 15 years, 9 of the 10 years, they're actually above 10% in their return. So even the years when we met the assumed rate of return, in a number of those years, it was met the assumed rate of return plus a lot more. So when you're putting that extra money into the system, if you're assuming 6.8 or 7% and you're getting 10%, you're getting that much more money into the system, which then helps you keep contributions lower because you're getting more money out of investments. So if you look at the 5-year net return, they are a healthy 9.29, clearly exceeding the assumed rate of return. 10-year, we're clearly over the assumed rate of return at 7.03, and the 20-year is 7.09. So when it comes to people questioning our assumed rate of return or any pension system's assumed rate of return, can you actually get that money into the system? In the WRS, we can say, yeah, we're getting that money into the system. So we're not having the problem of too high of expectations and performance not meeting that. So SWIB has done a good job, even though we've absorbed, you can see at least a couple of years during this 15 years where they had negative returns. So we're still able to exceed overall the assumed rate of return, which makes us resilient. And then we look at this. So this is a big advantage for the WRS as well. So this is a 30-year period. And again, our friends at NASRA looked at all the pension systems that they have data for and said, overall, how much money do people get from investment earnings? You can see that on the left, versus how much they need to ask for contributions. So this is basically the revenue side of that equation. So the green is the investment, and then the red and the blue tell you how much employers and employees are paying into the system to fulfill that revenue side of the equation. So you look at across the nation, that left-hand pie chart shows you 63%. Then you look to the right side and you look at the WRS funding sources for the exact same time frame, you can see that we're getting 78%, almost 80% of our revenue comes from investment earnings. And when you have that, you can then reduce the amount of contributions you need from your employees and employers. So the employers on the left-hand side there, nationally, they're putting in 26% of the revenue. In Wisconsin, it's only 11, and as 11% for employees in both. So we have the advantage of keeping contributions at a reasonable level because of the performance that SWIB has done for us, bringing that much investment earnings into the equation. So again, when you look at this part of the equation, we're at the contributions, we do a good job. We're looking at those, we're paying the bills. And then we look at investments, We set a reasonable assumed rate, and our performance has met that assumed rate. And as a result, we're getting more money into the system that to pay benefits from investments than we need to get it from contributions. So that again makes it resilient, because if contributions need to go up a lot, employers start to question how much they're paying into the system. So we can really keep this a sustainable system that way. All right, so then we'll move to the other side of the equation, which is the liability side. So we've covered the revenue side of that equation. We move to the liability side. Now I'm only going to go over the benefits part of that equation as opposed to get into expenses. Overall expenses for both SWIB and ETF are quite reasonable. ETF is quite below our peers when it comes to expenses. So we're keeping that down the best we can. So the other part of that liability side of the equation is benefits. And quite honestly, this is probably the biggest part of the WRS that makes us different than other systems and makes us more resilient than other systems. I can tell you this part of the presentation when I was at Stanford got the most interest. People were unaware that a state was doing what we're doing in Wisconsin, and they almost didn't believe it. The number of questions I got after my presentation clearly indicated that, and the number of questions I got at different breaks clearly indicated that. So if we look at it, we're looking at benefits. The first thing you have to look at is you have to make sure benefits aren't overly generous. If you have overly generous benefits, that means the amount of money you need to raise either through contributions or investment earnings needs to go up. We don't run into that in Wisconsin. We have very modest benefits. I think they fulfill their purpose and what they were designed to do, but they're not in a system. You may hear in other systems across the country, you hear about what's called a drop program, and you're hearing about multi-million-dollar payouts to people when they retire and then they get a pension system. When you have benefits that you haven't adequately prepared for paying, you run into financial problems as well. We do not have that in Wisconsin. We have a very good system when it comes to that. So we have modest benefits. You can see our average monthly annuity is about $2,400. And clearly that changes based on how long you're in the system, how much money you make when you are in the system. The big difference from us and the other systems, and really that contributes to the resilience that we have, is the shared risk design when it comes to providing annuity adjustments. When you look across the country, it's all over the board on how systems pay their cost of living adjustments after people start getting their pensions. Some have that written right into the statute. So every year you get 2 or 3%. Unfortunately, when there's years you don't have enough investment returns to be able to pay for that, you're going to run into funding problems. So they're kind of locked into a certain cost of living adjustment, even though they do not know what their income will be. And that has caused some problems in a lot of places. Again, a lot of those are set in statute. By the time you figure out you can't afford it, you go to the legislative process to get it fixed. That takes too long, and you're already shortchanging the system by the time you get it fixed. So Wisconsin, we don't do that. We don't guarantee any COLA to anyone when they retire, but we base it on keeping that equation balanced. So if we can keep the equation balanced, we pay a benefit. If we can't keep it balanced, then we either don't pay a benefit or reduce benefits. So that is why it's so unique. And when I talk to other people across the country, they can't fathom that you wouldn't pay a COLA or you would actually reduce a benefit in times of significant investment losses. So that definitely makes us unique and really contributes to the resilience. And then, as I noted, we do an experience study every 3 years to make sure that we have good assumptions when it comes to demographics, economic assumptions, to make sure that our analysis tells us exactly what our liabilities are going forward. So this is the crux of how we determine annuity adjustments. This is the big difference between us and other systems. And it's really quite simple in the way it was designed. You look at what is the net of fee return. Let's just say SWIB earned 15% in a given year. So we say, okay, we start with 15%. We then smooth it out over 5 years because we don't want volatility from year to year, because clearly investment returns can be quite volatile. And if we were just using a 1-year return, it would be quite volatile on what you might get for an annuity adjustment. And once you get into your retirement phase, you don't want big jumps or big, go way up or way down from year to year. You like a pretty stable income at that point, and that's why we smooth it over 5 years. So if we start with 15%, let's say SWIB did really great that year, got 15%. We look at the 5-year smooth returns. Let's say that takes it down to 10%. And then we say, okay, but now we need to fund annuities, because the way our system is set up is we assume that we will get 5% investment returns every year to make sure we have enough money to pay the already earned annuities, to pay your floor benefit, basically. So if your floor benefit is 1,000, if you look at all 200,000 plus annuitants, we need to have 5% investment earnings at least to be able to make sure that those are fully funded. Okay, so we had 10% smooth rate. We take 5% off that to make sure that we have the annuities paid for. If we have money left, then we go ahead and pay an annuity adjustment. So if we have 5%, in my example, we'd have 5%. So we would expect about a 5% annuity adjustment. If we had a different example there, if the net of fee return was lower, the effective rate was lower, and once we paid the annuities at 5%, then we didn't have any money left, then we either wouldn't pay an annuity adjustment, or the big thing that we're different than other systems is we would reduce a benefit of already earned annuity adjustments. So if we look at how that has played out over time, here's from 2013 to 2023, how this system has played out. So we have the annuity adjustments in the goldish yellowish color. As you can see, they're kind of all over the board, ranging from 7.4% in 2021, which when we provided that, that was like the highest annuity adjustment since 1999, I think. But you also have years when we didn't provide any annuity adjustment in 2018. And that's a really good example of how our system works, that 2018, right? So the return from SWIB was a negative 3.3. The 5-year smooth effective rate was 5%. We need 5% to pay the annuities. And then that left nothing for annuity adjustments. And lo and behold, annuity adjustments that year was 0. Thankfully, SWIB then had a number of good years, 3 years of 15% or higher returns, made the effective rate, that 5-year smooth rate, go all the way up to 12.9%. And then you end up with that very high annuity adjustment of 7.4%. So that's how the system has worked. And that's how it's made us more resilient, is that when we have the money to pay it, we pay it. And if we don't, we don't. Now, while this shows you kind of the experience over that time period, I think it's always good to talk about how this impacts an individual retiree, especially when we have to take money back, specifically bad period. So here's actual teacher in our system. I had somebody go into the system and find somebody that's been retired since 2001 and really document what their experience has been. So as you can see, this teacher retired in 2001 with the original floor annuity of about $1,900. And over the years leading up to 2008, kept getting annuity adjustments over that time. So you can see they were well over $2,000 a month. It looks like about $2,250 a month in their annuity. And then 2008 happens, fiscal crisis happens, and we don't have enough money to pay annuities. In fact, we have less than that. So now is a situation where we have to reduce annuities. So you can see this teacher experienced a 2.1% reduction in 2009, 1.3% in 2010. As you can see, all the way to a 9% reduction in 2013. And we couldn't go any lower than that because this individual teacher has reached the floor. We never can go below the floor. We only can reduce pension benefits based on what you've got in that annuity adjustments over the years. Thankfully, things have turned around after that, and this specific annuitant has got their pension back up to about $2,500 a month. But this has a big impact on people, and we are always very conscious of this. For someone to go in 2008 to where they're being paid probably $2,250 to under $2,000 a month by the time we got to their floor. So while this aspect of the system is critically important for us to be resilient and for us to maintain this high funding level, we are always very sensitive to the fact that it has a real impact on individual retirees. So we're always hoping to avoid negative annuity adjustments. So how has this system played out? Have we kept up with inflation? I mean, the idea is annuity adjustments give you a hedge on inflation as time goes on and as you're retired. This chart kind of shows you how well people have done depending on what year you retired. So if you look at this chart, this assumes you started your pension at $1,000 a month. That's your floor. Let's just use the core as an example for discussions today. If you retired in 2019, that very top row, you would be at $1,208 now. That's an increase of 3.9%. You look far to the right, you can see what the CPI has been in that time period. So 3.9 and 4.1, slightly under, but it is providing you some hedge on inflation. If you go down the chart there, 2014, you'd be at 2.7% increase, and 2.8 is the CPI. Again, slightly under, but you are hedging inflation. Unfortunately, 2009 and 2004, if you happen to retire in those years, you're not exactly hedging as well as we would hope. Unfortunately, keeping up with inflation is not the primary objective of the WRS. The primary objective is to make sure we're sustainable and fully funded. So unfortunately, in this situation, if you've been retired in 2009 or 2004, you're under inflation by more than what we would like. But again, those folks are the ones that probably had the biggest impact of 2008 happening. So that is why they have probably been a little bit further behind CPI. But if you're in 1999, you're pretty close to inflation. So overall, it has provided a hedge, not a perfect hedge on inflation, but when you consider the benefit of having the ability to make sure the system stays funded with negative annuity adjustments, I think the system is very well designed in that regard. So looking ahead, what do we see coming up for annuity adjustments, et cetera? So let's run through a few scenarios. So this chart kind of shows you 2023, which SWIB did great, the 11.4% return. As you know, we had a 3.6% annuity adjustment. If SWIB gets the assumed rate of return, which is the amount we're assuming is going to come in from them, that 6.8% over the next 4 years, that third column or third row down shows you what the annuity adjustments will be. So if we get 6.8% this year, which at the moment through March, I think we're at 3.5, so we're more than halfway there. We'd be at 1.7 to 2.1. Unfortunately, we get to 0 in 2025, and in 2026, we're actually have a potential for a negative annuity adjustment. So we've not had one since the 2008 situation, but we are looking at that potential if we only get 6.8% return over the next 4 years. The good news is it looks to be just a 1-year blip before we get back to positive annuity adjustments after that. So that's what it looks like if we just maintain the assumed rate of return when it comes to investment performance. So let's say they get 0. I mean, who knows where the economy is going in the second half of the year? Is it a soft landing? Is it not a soft landing? Where are interest rates going? How volatile does the market get? If they happen to get 0, if things kind of go south in the second half of the year, we are looking at a very small annuity adjustments, if any, in 2024. But then you can see, even if we bounce back to that 6.8% return, we now taken that 1 year of negative annuity adjustments and made it 2. So 2025 now has a negative annuity adjustment. 26 does, and 26 is a larger negative annuity adjustments. And then we bounce back in 27. And as I said earlier, we're always very sensitive to what does it take for negative annuity adjustments. So we always try to keep our eye on how bad does it have to be in any given year for that year to be a negative annuity adjustment. So right now, if SWIB would have a really bad second half of the year, and we went from 3.5% return in March to a negative 6% at the end of the year, you can see that we have a negative annuity adjustment potential in 2024, and that carries through all the way through 2027 if we only get back up to 6.8% in the future years. So we're kind of at this tenuous time. The reason for that is we've had a number of very big years built into the 5-year smoothing. As I said, they had 3 double-digit years. Those are starting to drop off the 5-year smoothing, and we're replacing that with smaller numbers. So when that happens, the effective rate continues to go down. So that's why there's a little more pressure on the potential for negative annuity adjustments at the moment. But I never like to leave on a negative note. So let's look at how about if SWIB just repeats what they did last year and gets about 12%. They got 11.4 last year. They get 12% this year, and then just have 6.8% after that. You can see that we avoid the negative annuity adjustment. So while these are scenarios and it shows what potentially can happen, we know that the investment return is really going to drive what actually happens. So if they didn't get 12% this year, but they got a little more than the assumed rate and a little more of the assumed rate in 2025, that could also avoid a negative annuity adjustment. So we'll just have to wait and see. But SWIB has had a good history of coming through for the system. So that's where we stand for this benefit side of the equation. Looking forward, like I said, the actual component of the benefit side that we actually have the option of having negative annuity adjustment really is a driving force into us being resilient. If we didn't have that in 2008, if we didn't get the money into the system from what we took from negative annuity adjustments, our funding level clearly would have suffered, just like other pension systems suffered in that time period. So that's our system. That's why it's resilient. That's why it's sustainable. If we look overall at the system, what is the outcome of our plan design? When we look at it, like I said, we're very sustainable. Pew has done a lot of work on public pensions over the years. They kind of started looking into this when the sustainability really became a question. And as you can see, why not question it when I showed you that original chart with how much it's been reduced in funding levels over the years. So they came up with this matrix, this little triangle. They looked at 3 components to say, is a system really sustainable? First bar you have to meet is solvency. You have to have enough money coming in through that side of the equation without having a lot of debt to pay your bills. Thankfully, everybody is solvent across the country, kind of a low bar. The next thing is, are you sustainable without having to put a lot of debt into your system? Are you taking out a lot of debt to pay your bills? Unfortunately, we lose 15 states from that, so there's only 35 that are meeting the debt reduction component. And then the top of the column, which everybody should strive to be at, is predictable costs. And that really is, you have a pension plan that maintains pension benefits that are at a suitable level, so you can still recruit and retain folks. One way to save money is to reduce benefits. So if you reduce benefits so far that it's not really a benefit anymore, that doesn't really count. So if you can keep your benefits at a good level without having such high contribution rates that the state budget priorities are affected, for instance, if people have to pay that 15% employer contribution that we see across the country, that takes money out of the state budget, which then means they can't pay for other things. And that's what's happened in other states. They've said, wait a minute, we want to pay for roads instead of pensions. So instead of fully funding the actuarial contribution, they decide to put money into road work or schools or you name it, whatever happens to be the issue of the day. We would fight pretty hard. We would fight very hard, I'd say, if people thought that was a good idea. Our history tells us a governor tried to do that, and we effectively did away with that idea. So we stay funded. It's another output of our design. So as you can see, this graph shows you all the pension systems and where they are at funding levels. The bigger the circle, the bigger the plans. Those big circles in the middle are California. Thankfully, the WRS, relatively big circle compared to the rest, is right there hovering around 100%. Another output of our plan design. And then predictable costs. This is what I said everybody should be striving for in Pew's triangle there. And when you look at Wisconsin, if you look at how much money is spent out of state and local governments' budgets for pensions, it's only 2.1% of their budgets. So we are not affecting really the budget priorities of various employers. We're only asking for 2.1% of the budgets to go into a public pension system that's fully funded. As you can see, the national average is higher than that at 5.1%. And that's when, if this number gets too high, that's when you have employers starting to question if this is a sustainable program. Thankfully, we have not had that discussion because our contribution levels have remained very reasonable. So back to my term of the day, I said we're going to talk about resilience. What does it mean? This is just the same graph I started my presentation with the funding levels of pensions across the country when they dropped all the way down to the mid-70s over a period of time. And it just compares it to the Wisconsin retirement system. This is what's happened. This is us being resilient. We had drastically changed circumstances in early 2000s. We actually went up in funding level. And then in 2008 happens, you can see that line stays right at 100%. So we should be very proud of the system, the way it is designed. This is a graph I used in my Stanford presentation to really point out that, yes, you can do it. There are designs for public pension systems that can be sustainable and resilient. And that was my message to them. Don't throw every defined benefit program into the same bucket and just say they're bad. It's just not true. Wisconsin and a few other states have demonstrated that over the years. All right, so we're in the home stretch here. Resilience doesn't just apply to the money or our funding levels. As I have figured out since I've become secretary, we need to be resilient as an agency as well. So there's things going on at ETF I wanted to make you aware of. We're doing the various things we're doing for a couple reasons, but resilience is definitely one of the reasons that we're doing that. We need to have administrative resilience, and we're doing that through innovation and modernization. So when I took over as secretary, when I was going through the interview process with the ETF board, I came with a business plan. I gave it to them as part of my interview and said, this is where I envision, this is my business plan for the future of the agency. If we're on the same page, I'd love to be the secretary. If you have a different path forward, then maybe I'm not your person. Thankfully, the ETF board was very receptive, all on board. But basically, my elevator speech for the future of ETF really shows you this arrow. We do a great job of serving our customers as we can. That means if you call us between 7:30 and 5 o'clock, we're going to pick up the phone and we're going to give you great service. If you come into the office for retirement counseling or talk about your health insurance or turn in a form, we're there. They're friendly people, knowledgeable people to help you navigate your benefits. But if you want to do something on the weekend or at night, you want to put a beneficiary form in, you want to make some changes within your system. Maybe your tax form needs updating. You want to do it maybe on the weekend or at night because that's when you're available. We're not able to do that. So I think we need to move the agency to the left where we serve customers as we can really well, but for a limited time period in any given day, to that supporting customers as they prefer, which is really what we're talking about, our customer experience. We're doing a variety of things to get input from our customers to know what their experiences are, what they want from us. I know the Coalition of Annuitants has been involved in helping us identify those things. We talk to folks, and from my perspective, we are moving the agency from serving customers as we can to supporting customers as they prefer. We need to do a variety of things to get there. All those boxes in between are the things we need to get done. We need to change the culture to make sure we're customer centric. We have to have good governance. We have to have the right technology and data. We have to have our employees having a good experience so they're best positioned to help the customer. And we have to have good policies and processes. If we have processes that are overly burdensome to the customer, that does not make for a great customer experience. So we are moving in that direction. I think we're making some good progress in that regard. The big thing that's holding us up from ultimately getting to my vision for the organization is that we have very old systems that we're using to run the system. For one, that does not make us very resilient, because the older the systems get, the more apt they are to fail or have problems with, which could impact the customer experience clearly. So we don't want that. So plus, we can't do a lot of things that members want us to do, like providing service after hours, seeing your account online. I think our call center agents tell me on a regular basis, one of the first or the number one questions they get in doing their jobs is, can I do this online? I'm calling you, but was there a way to do this online? Can I see my account online? We should be able to provide you that. Our systems, our IT systems don't allow us to do that at the moment. So that's why we're going through a modernization effort within the agency. One, to make sure we achieve that customer experience that we're trying to get to. And two, provide the resilience that we need to have to make sure that we're fully operating going forward into the future. As you can see, our systems here, we have one system that has a lot of retirement account information, is 36 years old, clearly in need of replacement. Retirement calculations, 24 years, member service requests, 14, and our benefit payment system, which by the way is the system makes sure you get your money in the first of the year, is 14 years old. The last thing I want to do is have that system fail. The last thing you want to happen is that system to fail. And I don't think our call center folks will be too happy if that would happen to happen, because calls would be, or phones would be ringing off the hook. So we are moving in a direction to make sure that doesn't happen. So you'll hear a lot about that going forward. What we're doing in that regard is we're putting in an insurance administration system that's handling all the health insurance. That system is dated and clunky. So we hope to have that implemented in 2025. So we're a long ways into that project. We really think that will be an advantage to the overall management of our insurance programs that we run at ETF. And then we will put in a new pension administration system right after. We will start on putting in a new pension system right after we implement the insurance administration system next year. So a pension administration system will allow us to do a whole slew of things that you can see our account information online. We'll probably have a member portal that you'll be able to use to see all your information, etc. And then really the advantages of all the systems we're putting in is we improve our productivity. We're using more modern systems. We can actually streamline processes. We can actually automate some processes and move people that are doing more manual work into more value positions, that they're actually creating value for customers, and will lower our operating costs, and we'll be able to respond better to when the legislature makes a change in the law. We can then change our systems to comply with the law. When that happens now, our IT folks, as well as other business people in the system, spend a very long amount of time making sure our systems can then adjust to what the legislature has done. So you will hear about, we are just at the beginning of putting together our biennial budget submission to the governor. We will be providing that to the governor in early October. The budget process kicks off in earnest in early of 2025. I can assure you that we will be asking for money for this pension system, and that amount of money will be significant, anywhere from 50 to 80 million dollars. We're just putting an RFP together now. We'll get a better idea of the actual cost as we get going here, but it is a significant ask of money. We'll also probably be asking for a few additional folks to help us get that system in. So if you see that, when you see various information about the various agencies' budget requests, you'll see a big number from ETF. It just is imperative that we get to a position where we can put in a modern system. Again, that helps us serve all our customers in a better way, and it makes sure we stay resilient on the administrative side of the house, as well as the financial side of the house. And with that, that finishes up my presentation.
Thank you very much, John, for being here this morning and for your presentation. The next speaker that we have is Mr. Dale Knapp, the Wisconsin Counties Association Research Director. He publishes research and analysis on a variety of economic and public policy issues facing the state of Wisconsin. Prior to joining WCA, Dale was with the Wisconsin Taxpayer Alliance for almost 18 years. Mr. Knapp will discuss the future of Wisconsin's workforce. So welcome, Dale.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Okay. Hold on. Slideshow. There we go. So let me just first talk just a little bit more about me and at Forward Analytics, what we do. So as was mentioned, I spent 18 years with the Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance, a non-research organization that looked at all types of issues facing the state, whether they be public sector issues, economic issues, the big issues of the day. We did a lot with schools, et cetera. I came over to the Wisconsin Counties Association in 2018 to start a similar research outfit. So under the umbrella of the County Association, we are, again, nonpartisan. We look at issues from both sides, from the middle, however you want to do it. We don't take sides on issues, but what we like to do is highlight, major issues facing the state. So we've addressed the housing crisis, the fentanyl crisis. We've done a lot on demographics, rural Wisconsin, birth rates, childcare. So again, a lot of various issues facing Wisconsin. We've grown actually fairly rapidly in terms of people reaching out to us with ideas of what we should study, with the press reporting on our findings on a lot of things. And so it's been a really good 6 years. And so it's, good to be asked to address, on what I think is one of the top issues facing the state, and that is the future of Wisconsin's work. Now, before we get to the future of the state's workforce, you have to have a sense of what's happening today in the current workforce and what's gotten us to this point. Because once you understand that background, it becomes a little bit easier to understand where we're headed and what we might do about that, what we might change. There's this saying out there that demography is destiny. So it's a lot of demographics that are behind these changes. I don't believe that demography is destiny, because you can change your demographics. There are ways that, not completely, but there are things that the state can do to change the makeup of its population and ultimately its workforce. We're at I would say, a unique time in history. Again, demographics, the retirement of the baby boomers has been driving a lot of this change. COVID and all of the impacts around COVID have changed the workforce to a degree, and not only changed the workforce, but in some ways changed how we approach work, especially with the remote options, et cetera. So we could have an employee, that works for a Wisconsin company, but living in Arizona, living elsewhere. And so there's a lot of that is going on. We're in a time of great change. So let's just start with sort of a 20,000 foot look at Wisconsin's workforce as it is today. If you read the newspapers, you read about unemployment being low, at 3%, 3.1%, 2.9%. We're at record low unemployment. We have, when you go out to stores, to restaurants, a lot of times you see, help wanted signs. You're seeing them everywhere. We have this unprecedented workforce shortage, and it's not just a Wisconsin phenomenon. This is happening, nationwide. In Wisconsin, the worker shortages are a little bit more acute than a lot of other places, but these things are happening everywhere. We have this long-term decline in what's called workforce participation, labor force participation. So it's essentially the share of the 16 and older population that is actually in the workforce. And we've seen this long-term decline in that percentage, in that share of that participation. But since COVID, we've seen some alarming, let me just say, alarming changes in terms of certain age groups, and they're alarming from one perspective, and I think they're good in another perspective, and we'll kind of get to that a little bit later. We have fewer people moving here. So one of the ways that we fill our workforce is with migration. Now, when people hear the word migration, often they think about international migration. For Wisconsin, when we're talking about migration, we're not just talking about people coming here from other countries. What we're talking about more often is people moving to Wisconsin from other states. And we're seeing a decline in the number of people moving here. And again, that's exacerbating the workforce challenge. At the same time, there is a real positive to all of this workforce shortage, and that's from the workers' point of view. With low unemployment and worker shortages, one of the things that we're seeing is wages increasing faster than typical. And one of the things we're going to see is that wages over the past several years have been what I would call pushed up from the bottom. So we're seeing bigger pay increases at the bottom end of the pay scale relative to the top end. So that's sort of the big picture of what's going on. So let's dig into sort of each one of these aspects of the current labor force. So this is just a graphic of the unemployment rate going back to 1990. You can go back a little bit further, but it makes the point. If you recall, back in the late 1990s, we were in a situation that was similar to today. One of the things you saw back in the late 1990s was a lot of help wanted signs. We saw 3.1% unemployment. But things were also different at that time in that one of the things we knew as economists was that unemployment rate, the worker shortage was going to turn around because of we didn't have the demographic challenges that we have today. And we saw the unemployment rate tick up after 2000, still at typically around 5 to 6%, and then spiked during the Great Recession. And since then has done a rapid decrease down to 3% in 2018. We see the COVID spike, very short term, and then reaching 2.9% in 2022, ticked up a little bit. The challenge here is, again, this is good news. Fewer people unemployed means less pressure on the unemployment system. There's a lot of good with that. At the same time, it makes it much more difficult for businesses. And one of the things we'll talk about a little bit later is particularly small businesses. That's where the big challenge is. I would not expect, barring a significant recession, would not expect the unemployment rate to move up a whole lot over the next several years or even longer. This, I think, this really puts the worker shortage in perspective. So this this comes from a new data set from the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics. So what they've done over the past several years is they collected information on job openings from employers. And you can go and look at job openings by state. And then they've combined that with their unemployment numbers. In other words, the number of people unemployed. And they have this measure that they publish, which looks at how many job openings are there in the state for every 100 residents who are unemployed. And as you can see, and this fluctuates a little bit from year to year, but from 2003 to 2013, roughly, again, being very crude, there were just under 50 job openings for every 100 unemployed residents. So the number of people unemployed exceeded the number of job openings. And again, that fluctuated from year to year. After 2013, we began to see that move up. So that by 2018, 156 job openings for every 100 unemployed residents, or think about that as 1.5 jobs per unemployed. 2023, last year, we are now at more than 2 job openings for every unemployed person. When I put show this to people, one of the questions I often get is, then why do we have any unemployed? Well, there's obviously going to be, there can be a lot of mismatches. The job openings, there might be a skill mismatch between the types of jobs that are open and the people who are unemployed. There could be a location mismatch. So if the job openings are in Madison and Dane County, but there's unemployed out there throughout the state in Green Bay, in Milwaukee, there's that location issue. So there can be a lot of different mismatches. But the point is, what we're seeing is significantly more job openings. Businesses are doing well. They can't find workers. Then we have unemployed people. So in order to fix that problem, in order to fill those job openings, we need to do essentially one of two things. We need to grow the workforce in some way. And what that could be, again, we'll talk about in a bit. That could be by migration, people moving into the state because there's a lot of opportunities, or it could be by increasing labor force participation, people who are not in the workforce moving into the workforce. And this is sort of a conundrum, in some ways, because typically when you see, so people are out of the workforce for a variety of reasons, but economists always believe that at some point there's a wage that will bring you back into the workforce for a lot of people. And when you see wages rising like they've been rising, and we see this many opportunities, at the same time, again, as I just mentioned very briefly, we'll see later, participation going down, that's kind of unusual. And so there's a lot of, there's something else going on here. But again, lots of opportunities out there. So let's get to labor force participation. Again, this one we're going back to 2000. In 2000, about 73% of the 16 and older population was in the labor force. So in the labor force means you're either working or you're actively looking for work. Since then, again, with fluctuations, we've seen this long-term decline, a spike up after 2015, not exactly a spike, a move up after 2015, and then a decline, a pace of decline after that was more rapid than earlier. And as you see, after 2020, 2021, a real significant move down to 64.5% of the population. I put the 2023 numbers on there with a caveat that they are preliminary. There's a chance they could get change as they get more data. Typically, they don't change by very much, so there's probably been this blip up in 2023, but we'll have to wait a little bit longer to get the final numbers. Economists have been trying to figure out what's been going on and why some of these decline is happening. The long-term decline is a lot of it, especially after 2010, has to do with demographics. Most people begin to retire. We typically use the age 65. It obviously varies, but somewhere in their 60s, often 65 is looked at as the time when most people retire. And so as that baby boom began to retire after 2010, you had and I show this on here, if you look at the labor force participation of this 55 to 64-year-old population, it's about 67%. After 65, it's about 17%. So you have this big population moving out of the workforce, and that's part of that's driving down the participation rate. And that's not that's simply demographics at work, and it's that changing population mix that explains nearly all of the recent change. But since 2016, there's been a decline in the 35 to 44-year-old population. A little, there's been some decline in the 25 to 34. It's moved a little bit more, and some decline in some of the older populations. But these two, both men and women, the decline has been fairly significant. So female participation in this age group is down 7.2 percentage points since 2016. That's a big drop. And males are down 3.6. We're not completely sure as to the reasons. We can make some educated guesses as to what's going on. One of the things that there are some recent studies that have pointed to is the decline since, especially in females in this age group, the decline since 2020, since COVID, and attributing at least some of that decline to the fact that usually mothers, but sometimes mothers and fathers, or fathers, because of virtual schooling, stayed home with their, and they worked from home and stayed home with their children. And coming out of that, some surveys point to that there was a purposeful change in work-life balance. And so in some cases, one or the other of the parents deciding to leave the workforce and stay at home. We don't know the total impact of that, but there is that. There's another source of this decline that is out there that to be honest, I don't know a whole lot about, and that is, there are a lot of both men and women in these age groups that are earning incomes in unconventional ways and from online activities, the quote unquote, the influencers, getting paid for their Instagram, through Instagram or wherever these online influencers, however they get paid. And so their surveys don't often pick that up, that, in terms of being in the workforce. And so some of it may have to do with that. But again, this is something that it's going to take a while to study, to figure out. But again, this is a concern for the workforce because we're in the labor shortage. But on the other side of that is, again, if it benefits the family in other ways, then it's, that balances it out, obviously, and it shouldn't be viewed necessarily as a problem. But we're going to have to figure out how to fill that part of the workforce. As I mentioned earlier, one of the ways that we fill our workforce over time is through net migration, through more people moving to the state than leaving the state. The 1990s for Wisconsin was really a boom time in terms of net migration. During that time, we saw almost 230,000 people move to the state from other states and other countries. Let me repeat that, 230,000 more people coming here than leaving, because obviously there's always flows back and forth. During the 2000, the first decade of the 2000s, that number dropped to 80,000, and over the most recent decade down to about 55,000. Within that net migration, and again, this has an impact on workforce, we were major importers. The strength of our net migration was really the 25 to 45-year-old population, the what I would call family formation years. And so when you have families coming to the state, not only are you bringing often two workers, but many times you're bringing children, which, if they stay, again, can be part of the workforce, 15, 18 years from now. That has changed over the last 2 decades, and we are not nearly as strong in attracting those age groups, and that's been one of the big reasons why we've seen this big decline. The other challenge in terms of net migration that Wisconsin has, and a lot of states have this, is we lose a lot of young people graduating from high school, mostly graduating from college, leaving the state to go to, quote unquote, the big city. One of the things we found out in recent years through a new data set that's out there, we've got some information on where, really specifically, where these young people are going. And it really is big lights, big city. They're going to LA, New York, Phoenix, Seattle, Denver, those types of cities. And Wisconsin, we have Milwaukee in the Milwaukee area, but Wisconsin just does not attract that 18 to 24 cohort. And that's an age group that it would be nice to be able to attract, because one of the things the migration data tells us is that, again, we have historically been attractive to young families, and if we can get those young people here and stay here until they're in their family formation years, they're more likely to stay, which again would help with our workforce. And so part of our strategy really needs to be figuring out a way to not only keep our young people, but to attract young people to the state. And the other part of our migration strategy needs to be to figure out why we are no longer, the family formation years are not our major strength anymore, and how do we get back to attracting those young families. We also have this, in terms of demographics, and this is not yet affecting our labor force, but this has some long-term impacts on our workforce, and that is this very consistent decline in the number of births since 2007. Since 2007, the number of births in Wisconsin has declined in every year but two, 2014 and 2023. In fact, in 2022, we moved under 60,000 births in the state, which was the lowest number since 1942. You know, when you think about the populations then and now, that's a stunning number. And so again, people, as economists, we talk about, you know, it takes 18 years to create a worker, you know, and so one of the things we think about is, you know, the number of children today is going to reflect in a large way the labor force that we're going to have in 18 to 20 years. And so as we get to looking what the future of Wisconsin's workforce looks like, this is obviously going to play a role. It means that, you know, that group of young people aging past 18, aging past 22, as they head into the workforce, is going to be smaller and smaller as we move forward. So let's get to some good news. As I mentioned, one of the things this labor shortage has been doing has been driving up wages. I don't have the 2022 numbers yet. The data set that this comes from lags a little bit in terms of timing, but I would expect we would find the same thing. So what we did here is we took, so this comes from a data set that contains the wages of various occupations in the state. It comes from about 600 occupations in the state that are categorized. And what we did is we broke them into the 10 groups from the lowest, the average wage, the 10% of workers in jobs that paid the lowest wage up to the highest average wage. So roughly the same amount of people in each of these groups. And what you see is over that 2 years, in the lowest 20% of jobs or of workers, 2-year increase of almost 12% and a little over 11%. Whereas you look at the top, you see less than 4%, less than 6% over a couple of years. So one of the things that this worker shortage has done has been to push up wages from the bottom, and that's obviously a good thing. You know, that those low-paying jobs are becoming a little bit more competitive, you know, in terms of getting to where they need to be for people to really be able to support themselves. And again, they're not always there yet, but they're moving there. It's also creating a challenge in particularly 2 areas. One is, again, we did this study on childcare a little over a year ago. And unfortunately, childcare workers have among the lowest pay in among all occupations. They're paid very little, you know, $13 an hour, $14 an hour. And one of the things that's occurring is as these wages get pushed up from the bottom, they're now seeing that they can go and work at the you know, a chain hardware store, a lot of other places where instead of making 13 or 14 that they're making now, they can make $18, $20 an hour. And so we're seeing people leaving that industry and childcare in such high demand that we're not even filling all the seats that we might have available, and it's pushing up the cost, and childcare is already unaffordable for many. So it's really creating an issue in the childcare industry, and we're going to see the same. We're seeing the same thing with for example, CNAs in the senior care area, that those wages are being pushed up, which is good for the CNAs. But again, we're also seeing some of them leaving the industry and going to other places where they can earn a lot more. So with that in mind, look at what's ahead. One of the things that as economists we're always aware of when we project, we're often asked to project the economy next year or the next 5 years, et cetera. And one of the things we know is we're going to be wrong. We just don't know by how much. Hopefully we get the direction right. On some of the, because much of what's going on now is being driven by demographics, it's a little bit easier to project the future. And I put this slide up here. This isn't to brag, but this is just to point out that it is possible to look at what the demographics are today and get a sense of what they're going to look like 10 or 15 years down the road. So when I was at the Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance in 2004, we published a report called Wisconsin Future, where we looked at the current demographics, how they were expected to change over the next 15 to 20 years. And one of the things we said in there is, the number of state residents of working age is expected to rise slowly until approximately 2015, which it did. And over the following 15 years, the working age population will decline about 85,000. We're going to see that that is about what we're going to see. Growth in the state's workforce expected to stagnate, and the demand for workers projected to outpace labor force growth, recurring labor shortages, and the unemployment rate will likely reach record lows, possibly falling below 3%. So there were some other things in there that we didn't get exactly right. But again, I think I just put this up here because in terms of demographics and the workforce, we are able to project with some degree, at least, what the future of the workforce is going to look like, unless we take action, I would say, to affect that change. So we did a simulation and looked at, okay, what if what if the over the 2020 to 2030 time period, we see migration patterns very similar to what we saw during 2010 to 20, and we look at birth rates and all of those things and trend those out. What do we find? By 2030, our workforce, it's not just going to grow slowly. It's actually going to be smaller than today, as much as 100,000 smaller. The primary workforce, and I think that's the one we really need to focus on, 25 to 64. That's the ages that most people that are in the workforce are working full time. Likely to be smaller than today by somewhere between 100 and 200,000. And again, there's some error in there, but big declines in the primary workforce. And if you look out even further, by 2040. We might see a slight increase in our primary labor force, but our total workforce is going to be even smaller than in 2030. So it's the challenges that we have in terms of the workforce today are going to continue. They're going to continue through the 2030s unless we do something to address that. Now, let me just say there are other states that have been addressing this. I shouldn't say states, not just states, some states and some local communities by offering incentives for people to move here, move to their states or to their communities. Some have been more successful than others, but that is an opportunity that I think that we have because we have a lot to offer, you know, in the state to begin thinking about how do we attract people to Wisconsin? What do we need to do? What types of incentives do we need to provide? Because otherwise we're going to be facing significant challenges in terms of the workforce. The other thing that I hear often from people when we talk about labor shortage is, okay, so how does it affect me? You know, there's a lot of impacts that this is going to have. Again, increased competition for workers and rising wages, which is a good thing for the worker. At the same time, it creates challenges for businesses. And so we're going to see likely business closings or leaving the state, especially small businesses. This is especially hard on small businesses with very tight margins that can't afford to bump their wages for their employees up another, 8, 10, 12%. However, as wages rise, obviously that's a business cost. There is going to be an effect on prices with the stubborn inflation that we have. That's a small piece behind it that's going to make it more difficult to bring prices down. And as I mentioned earlier, in the couple of industries where this is already having big effects, that's childcare, nurses, and CNAs. We don't have enough of either of them, and the labor shortage just makes it increasingly difficult to fill those kinds of positions. Again, but what does it mean for the typical resident? Well, one of the things I say is, that that place you go every Friday for your fish fry. Many of them are struggling as it is. If this labor shortage gets worse, they might be gone in a few years. That local hardware store in your town that has been there for 25 years, as they can't find workers, they're going to be shutting down. So there's a lot of local impacts that people are going to feel unless we begin to do something and try to fix this. And again, the only way that we're going to fix this in the near term is through net migration into the state. And again, whether that's international, which Wisconsin generally doesn't have a lot of international, or whether it's from other states. Now, I will say the one state that's been helping us significantly, and that's Illinois. We have had a lot of net migration from Illinois as, they have a lot of fiscal problems and other problems, and we're seeing, migration, across that border increase. But we need to reach out, to other places, and let people know this is a great place to work, to play, to raise your family, and we need to figure out a way to bring those people here. So with that, that ends my presentation. I'd be open if there are any questions.
Get my Dale, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good. I'm not sure why my video's not coming up. I'm trying to trying to get up there. But anyway, let me just go ahead and maybe it'll take care of itself. Maybe that'll do it. There we go. All right. Well, Dale, thank you very much for your thought-provoking, comprehensive overview of Wisconsin's labor situation. I think we gained a lot of insight into what could be if we don't make some changes soon. And I think a number of our listeners and viewers also have questions. So let me get to them and start that. We have several lined up already. So first question, do the job openings number include both full-time and part-time jobs?
They do. And unfortunately, they don't distinguish between the two. And that's another, again, that's another reason why you might see a mismatch, somebody looking for a full-time job and it's only part-time available. So yeah, but they do.
Good. Are contract workers counted in workforce participation rates?
Yes, because so the way they determine that is, again, by surveys of households. They ask people, are you working? Do you have a job? Or are you looking for a job? So it comes from the household, and it's self-reported. Yeah, so it'd be contract jobs, any kind of job that they're working.
Okay. Moving along, do schools need to do more on the worth of work? Look at how many lower paying jobs aren't getting filled. What can be done to change attitudes?
Boy, that's a tough question. I mean, I think it's all. I mean, I think young students always would benefit from being taught the worth of work, whether that's from home or from school. I think that's always something that's worthwhile. And what was the second part of the question?
What can be done to change attitudes?
Boy, that's a harder question. And I think if I had the answer to that, that would make me very rich, because we could change attitudes and we could solve a lot of our problems. Yeah, I just I don't have an answer for that. I don't know.
Okay, let's try our next question then. At the same time that the number of births is declining and the young people are leaving or not coming to Wisconsin, the number of people over 60 is increasing. Have you studied the effect this will have over time?
Yeah, and that again, we've looked at it, in a lot of ways. It's going to, it's going to affect schools. Schools are funded based on enrollment, and so we've seen declining enrollment. That's going to continue. And the challenge there is you see a lot of school districts already going to referendum. Seniors that are on fixed incomes are often less likely to vote for these referendums, because they don't have the growing incomes necessarily to pay for that. So that it's going to create this intergenerational conflict to some degree, in terms of funding schools where enrollment is declining. It's sort of this conflict that's happening now to some degree, but I think is going to continue to happen and maybe grow.
Right. Besides wages and salaries, what might employers like school districts do to enhance chances to retain workers? Worker loyalty seems less and less.
Well, school districts, let me just, school districts, that's a little bit different, but let me just say what I think, in terms of in general, what do employers do? And I think that's, there's only so much, in terms of the revenue that you're bringing in that you can pay, but, it's more and more important to create a working place that people want to come to. Oftentimes it's having a little bit more flexibility if possible, in terms of the workforce, in terms of your workers, but it's creating a work environment that people want to be a part of. Schools, it's a little, again, that's a little bit different. There's some opportunity for that, but I think there's less opportunity than in some businesses. We were the other thing that we have been thinking about and is in terms of retaining workers. One of the things that we've thought about in terms of counties, and school districts and municipalities is that benefit of state retirement. The problem is younger people change jobs much more often than, for example, my generation did. And they don't see that as big of a benefit as, the older generations do. So that benefit, I think, is something that's a very positive. The challenge is to get young people to understand how good that benefit is and that it's worth, staying in education or in county government or in municipal government or whatever, because that is something that 30 years down the road, 40 years down the road, you're going to say, yeah, I'm glad that I have, that state retirement.
I think it's fair to say that everyone on this phone call is very glad they stayed inside state and local government to pick up their pension system, Dale.
Yes.
That's why we're on the phone call today, or on the system today. Moving along to our next question. How many college folks come to Wisconsin from other states and then stay here?
Not as many as we should. That's actually, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. It's something that it is on our list of topics that we want to look at in terms of Wisconsin students who go to a state school and stay here and leave, and again, those coming from other states and leaving. Historically, it's been a fairly small percentage of the ones that come here and stay. It's generally been a relatively small percentage, but that may have changed over the past several years. I just don't know that.
I'm going to just interject kind of a general question, Dale. Hearing your talk and the many nuances of where we are with our labor workforce, is it your opinion that our legislative leaders really understand the nature of the moment and what's going on here? I think most of us on the call here today understand kind of what you're saying. And if we don't move sooner than later, we're going to be in a difficult situation. Do you sense that our legislative leaders understand what's in front of them?
I would say that many do. But again, it becomes much more complex when you get over to the legislature, because there's so many priorities. And so I think there are, many that do see this. I would say when we did the report in 2004, because everything was so good, essentially during those times, in terms of the economy, most legislators just sort of scuffed it off and said, we're not, they didn't believe it. But now that we're in this situation, and you can see that there's really no way out without some action, you are seeing more legislators understand that. And I guess I'm a little bit surprised that we've really not seen any action on it, that attempts to really do something to and again, incentives, whatever that is, to attract people here to help solve the problem. It really does surprise me.
Yeah. Well, I hope they get their act together, so to speak.
Yeah.
Moving along, I got another question too here, I think, to try to work in. This is a different take on the question about instilling the worth of work. Perhaps the burden should be on families. There is a teacher shortage in Wisconsin, and teachers can't do it all. So are we missing something at some other level of communication or education, Dale?
Well, I mean, I've always believed, education has to be, a partnership between, families and schools. It's family. When you look at generally, when you look at school performance, there's a lot of factors that go into it, but a lot of times, a portion of that falls back to the families that are involved, really involved in their kids' education. That's just really, really critical. One, it reemphasizes for them the importance of education, for them, and so yes, the two have to work together, and it's a lot of this does have to fall back on families.
The next and what appears to be the final question kind of brings us to an interesting kind of take on cost. Taxes and housing costs keep going up. There are astounding rental prices in relation to income, close to 50% in cost, this person says. Do you see any changes in this happening soon? In other words, will these increasing costs start to make further impacts on labor and people's desire to stay in Wisconsin?
So the tax, but let me just start with the tax question, because that's one that people get a sense of, but it's oftentimes it's a little bit misleading. So there have been a lot of there's been a lot of action taken to try to bring taxes down, and some have been successful, and so when you look at the overall tax burden in the state, it has actually been declining for a number of years now. In any individual location or situation, they might see them going up, but in the big picture, that burden has not been really rising in Wisconsin. In terms of housing, we just did a report on housing, and essentially said that just to sort of stay even, we need to build somewhere between 150 and 200 and some thousand housing units in this decade. And one of the challenges we pointed out was when with the high interest rates we have now, has sort of stalled everything and made things very unaffordable. And so, at this point, and so a lot of that construction has slowed. So at this point, in terms of the housing, unless something changes significantly, I don't see those costs coming down much, unless we get big declines from the Federal Reserve in terms of interest rates, because that affects the cost of housing so much. And so that, again, that's a struggle. And this goes back to the migration. If we can't build enough houses for the workers that are going to be coming here that are residents, we definitely aren't going to have enough housing units to bring people in from other parts of the country.
Well, Dale, that's the end of our questions. I thank you for your time today and your thought-provoking presentation.
Thanks for inviting me. It was great to be here.
Again, Dale, thank you so much. A lot to take in, but very good information. Well, with that, everybody, thank you so much for attending this virtual Wisconsin Coalition of Annuitants Conference today. We hope that you will be able to join us tomorrow, May 23rd, for the second part of the conference, same time and same place. Please take a moment at the end of this session to complete our brief survey. When you press the red leave button, you'll be directed to the survey. Completing the survey will help us in planning future informational meetings. Again, thank you for attending and hope to see you tomorrow.